Hitchcock. Women have always played an important role in Hitchcock movies, not only for romance, but as icons of those obsessive images Hitchcock so frequently desired in films ripe with those images. As to the cool blonde that often found its way into his films,
I think this is because I personally, on the screen, have an objection to the type of woman who wears her sex round her neck like jewelry.
In 1953, Hitchcock cast Anne Baxter opposite Montgomery Clift in I Confess, a film about a priest's torment over hearing the confession of a killer. Hitchcock was a man of extreme habits, and Anne Baxter recalls taking Hitchcock's wife Alma for a drive in the country and being late in returning to the hotel.
All these long stone steps going up, and there was Hitch sitting at the table all by himself with his big chop sitting on the plate, looking like this and furious. And Alma fluttered up and said, oh, and everything, we went up the thing, and he looked at me, and it was all my fault. I don't think he ever quite forgave me for that.
2 years later, in 1955, Hitchcock cast a young Broadway dancer in his film The Trouble with Harry. It was Shirley MacLaine's first movie. She played opposite John Forsythe in this black comedy about a body that wouldn't go away. MacLaine says Hitchcock was very sensitive to her inexperience, and she was fascinated by his appetite.
I used to go and watch him eat. That's what I thought was really fun, because he was an artist at eating, too. Matter of fact, he got me so addicted to eating because I was a chorus girl and didn't have any money, and by the time I made The Trouble with Harry, I think I'd only had 2 steaks in my life in New York because I was living on graham crackers and peanut butter. And we were staying at a hotel in Vermont, the Lodge it was called, in Stowe, Vermont. And I would go and watch him order breakfast, lunch, and dinner because it was such an artistic achievement.
No film of Hitchcock's carries out the theme of the cool blonde and the equation of danger and eroticism more than Vertigo, released in 1958. It is a supreme example of pure cinema, with an on-camera transformation of its female star, Kim Novak, by co-star Jimmy Stewart. Novak remembers Hitchcock's purely technical approach to creating those erotic visual images.
It was so technical. At times, there were scenes that he had in the background a metronome, is that what you call it? One of those going back and forth to carry the tempo of the scene. He wanted me to say it all within a certain... it was really difficult. Instead of trying to reach me on an emotional level that would gear me to whatever level of pace or whatever that he wanted, he liked doing it technically. Everything he thought of, he saw through the camera, everything.
Can't reach now. The very next year, 1959, Hitchcock gave waiting fans one of his most entertaining films, North by Northwest. This comedy thriller cast Eva Marie Saint as the cool blonde opposite Cary Grant, with its climactic scene one of fascinating juxtaposition and sexual innuendo. Hitchcock called it coming under the heading of pornography ahead of its time.
He worked more with the externals. I remember he said, lower your voice, don't use your hands. See, I gesture a lot. No, I'm not going to do any more of that. Just be a little more cool and composed. And he gave me a few directions like that, and suddenly the character began to emerge in my mind and then in my soul, and I loved playing that sexy spy lady.
1963 found an unknown young model and commercial actress named Tippi Hedren starring in The Birds. And the following year in Hitchcock's Marnie opposite Sean Connery. It was a story of sexual repression. Hedren recently told author Donald Spoto in his book The Dark Side of Genius that during the Marnie filming, she was subjected to a disturbing obsession with her by Hitchcock.
It was a thrill to be in those 2 films working with Hitchcock. And at the same time, it was very, very sad that there was a possessive quality there that I could never live with. He hated his body. He hated the house that he lived in. And it left very, very deep psychological scars on him that made his life very, very painful. He was a really very lonely, lonely man.
Sardou said, torture the woman as a piece of dramatic. And the trouble is today, we don't torture the women enough.
Tomorrow, Hitchcock and some of his actors. For today, Jim Brown, NBC News, Hollywood.
Up next, the subject is stress and how to control it. But first, this is Today on NBC.